All right, welcome everybody. I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you. Well, Happy New Year to everybody pretty soon. Last week we introduced the Hebrew calendar, which is, besides the star calendar, it's the most complicated of the other calendars because it keeps track of the moon and the sun and the week. And last week we showed how that's done by inserting. Well, actually, I didn't say this part. You insert extra days in a month to make the moon come out right. A month can have either 29 or 30 days, but they don't always alternate. And you make the year come out right by inserting entire extra months. And the week you never change, of course. It just is always right. So with that in mind, we also finished by reviewing the major holy days. There's about 20 minor holy days too, which let's not do yet. I don't want to overwhelm people. This is the introduction. But these are important because now we're going to look at how they're used. Moses was given 7 of these, and I've expanded it a little bit because some of them came into fruition after Moses, like Easter Sunday. It was a ceremony before, but it wasn't a holy day. It was the offering of the waving of the first fruits of the ground, different from the feast of first fruits of the wheat. This one is first fruits of barley. This is first fruits of wheat. Anyway, let's move on now and see how the Lord lines up events in the Savior's life, and then we're going to go all through the Bible and things later, and has holy events happen on these holy days. You know, I will say just a little more that I did not last week. Let's go back to 99. There's just a little more that needs to be said. These each have symbolism. Trumpets is the day you announce something new. It's when it represents the beginning of the millennium, when the 7 angels blow the 7 trumpets to announce the millennium. Atonement is at the trumpets, announces the coming of the Lord, and you have 9 days to repent. On the Day of Atonement, you find out if you made it or not. That's your day to get everything right with God. The Feast of Tabernacles is like, it's birth. It's when you get your tabernacle and end tabernacles like death, but it's also the marriage of the Lamb. It's just all kinds of things. Passover is the first coming of Christ is tied to Passover. A lot of things will happen on Passover. The second coming is tied to tabernacles. This is the middle of the year. This is the end of the year. So there's some more background on the holy days. Now go to slide 99. Okay, the birth of Christ we already did in an earlier slide. It's on Wednesday, the 5th of April, after sunset. That's why we celebrate on April 6th, because it's on Hebrew calendar, that's the next day. And on these slides, I have so little space to write. I don't put in after sunset, before sunset. That's on my pages, but I don't want, some people they're not taking the tutorial. They just see these slides for the first time, and they can't learn everything on one viewing. But anyway, it's after 6 p.m. He's born. But that is the beginning of that's when the Passover feast is held. It's the beginning of, it's called the Passover Day. And it's the beginning of, it's the Passover feast, which is sometimes called the Seder. And it begins a whole week of celebration. But when I just say Passover, it means the day on which the feast is eaten. That celebrates not only the birth of Israel, but it's the birth of Christ, but also the birth of Israel at the Exodus. That's one thing that was not noticed for many, many years. Everybody knows that Exodus Passover is associated with Exodus. When they get out of slavery, they go into the desert. That's symbolic of being born and going into life, the celestial world, or out of the Garden of Eden into the wilderness. Passover is also symbolic of birth in that sense, along with tabernacles. I don't believe the people would have celebrated the Lord's birth or been ready to know about it, so the Lord set it up so that his birth would happen at the time of the birth of the country of Israel and the man Israel. We'll see that too. And the Lord said to Jacob, I will sojourn with thee. And he said that to Moses and Israel. And that has to do with his life being on the very same dates as that happened in the Exodus. Boy, this is tough to go fast through these slides. There's a lot here. Next slide, 101. Okay, we saw this before when we did the Venus calendar, the trip to Egypt with the infant Jesus to save him from being slaughtered. We saw before that it began on a Venus holy day of one birth and ended on one death. But now we're going to see it's also tied to the Hebrew calendar. And I'll always have PH in these. Whenever I say Hebrew, I mean the perpetual Hebrew calendar. That's what we talked about last week. The regular Hebrew calendar is not accurate enough to use back at these times, or especially back at the time of Abraham and of Adam. The trip to save Jesus from slaughter began on this day, Wednesday, 5th of July, after dark, so I had room to say it. The 17th of Tammuz. Now that's a minor holy day. Oh, I've got it here. A holy fast day for decision and weeping for loss. Now I don't say it here, but talk about weeping for loss. That's where Rachel will weep for her children. I mean, they're weeping for loss, and it was a decision because the angel told them to leave, but they had to decide to obey the angel and to leave right then. And the angel told them, stay in Egypt until I come and tell you to return. So an angel told Joseph both when to leave for Egypt and when to return. So these alignments are not random things. They're when angels appear or when angels tell you when to do things, almost every case I know, they're on holy days. In the Book of Mormon, an angel appears to Amulek, and it was on first fruits. That's how it works. The return began on the 22nd of March, AD 1, being one consecration. Most people will tell you Herod died in 4 BC. I've got papers on Herod actually died about February of AD 1. So this is a month after Herod's death, and the angel said, hey, Herod's dead now. It's good to go back. So it was a 9-month stay in Egypt. Oh, and it happens, this is the point of the slide. The return trip starts on the day consecration. And that's the day you choose the lamb, for the sacrificial lamb. Okay, next slide, 102. We've already seen slides from the sacred round that said Jesus was baptized on 13 water. We've seen slides on the Venus calendar that said Jesus was baptized on the day for baptism of the Venus cycle, the one day in a year and 3/5. That's for baptism. He's baptized on that day. How was the day determined? It was determined this way. The Savior's baptism occurred on Saturday, 6th of October, AD 29, being the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year, the day to make reconciliation with God. Yes, the 7 holy days that were given to Moses, there were 6 feast days and 1 fast day. And the fast day was the holiest day, and that was the Day of Atonement. So there was a 6 and a 1, 7s everywhere, 12s everywhere. Numbers are important. Next slide, 103. Okay, Jesus. Oh, wait, go back to 103. There you go. I got to look at yours. I look at the wrong screen. I hope the last one was on the right picture of the trip.
Yeah, it wasn't, but we'll get it fixed.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll try to remember what screen to watch. Okay, number 103. Jesus began his public ministry. Now we've had that. He began it on a holy day. We've had it on the Enoch calendar. It was on the priest calendar. We talked about a holy day, and it was on fullness on the Venus calendar. And it's a holy day on the sacred round calendar. So I hope you get the idea. We're getting multiple witnesses here. But how was this date determined? This is from the Hebrew, because in the Bible, it tells you the exact day. It says, John says in about chapter 2, that Jesus began his public ministry at Passover. And just shortly before that, they were at the wedding in Cana, and Jesus said, it's not my time yet. I shouldn't be changing water to wine, but he did it anyway on the sly, so nobody noticed. But this time he's not on the sly. He's doing public miracles. He's doing healing. It's Passover, and that's the official starting day of his public ministry, and it's right out of the Bible. So that's how the day's determined. Oh, and guess what? It happens to be the same as his birthday on our calendar. It's Saturday, the 6th of April, AD 30. It turns out after 30 years, the Hebrew calendar repeats on our calendar, which is not taking care of the moon. So he's born basically on April 6th, and he starts on April 6th, but that only happens about once in 30 years, and that's when he started. So that's important. These are little nuances I can explain in your class here that are not on my tutorial. That's why you're here listening, to pick up these little goodies. Anyway, see, isn't that cool? It's on, and it's going to turn out to be on 10 holy calendars. It's going to get the rest of them. But anyway, it's on, and so this is 2. This means it's Passover on both the Hebrew and the Enoch. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 sacred calendars so far for his beginning of his ministry. Okay, slide number 104. Jesus was transfigured, and now we had dates for this before too. Remember, it was 1 light. Oh, I've got it here, 13 light on the sacred round, and it was tabernacles on the Enoch calendar. Which was why they were saying, let's make tabernacles, because the Essenes and some people were following the Enoch calendar more than the other one. I'd like to know the full story of why they said, let's build tabernacles, but it's got to be related to this. It was the Feast of Tabernacles, but not on the calendar most people think they're using. On the Hebrew calendar, it's the Day of Atonement. And this, anyway, so again, holy, and what's that? The holiest day of the year. Perfect day for transfiguration. Light on the day of light. Okay, next slide, 105. Okay. The crucifixion is on the day on 14 Nisan, not 15 Nisan that they call Passover. I call it Lamb Day. This is the day where you sacrifice the lamb. So it's done in the afternoon of the Friday, and then the Passover is going to start at 6 p.m. on Friday, or at the sunset. In their day, they did it at sunset. But on the Hebrew calendar, it's done at 6 p.m., which is actually the more correct. For this, that's how the Hebrew calendar works. So the crucifixion is Friday, the 1st of April on our Gregorian calendar. 14 Nisan, which is Lamb Day. And he's born, so Christ was born after 15 Nisan began at 6 p.m. and he died about 3 p.m. as 14 Nisan was ending. He lived on the Hebrew calendar exactly 33 years. If you start on one day, we usually think the Passover to Passover would be 33 years, but really that would be one more day than 33 years for those that are being picky with this stuff. The completion of 33 years is you start on one day and you end on the day just before that comes around again. So he lived exactly 33 years on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, slide number 106. The resurrection, we've seen that several times already. It was on the day one resurrection of Venus, and the day for one resurrection on the priest, and the day for resurrection, Easter, on the eunuch. I mean, this is the most holy day of the year. I mean, I don't even know how to calculate it, but of 16 calendars, I believe 15 are on a holy day, but not only a holy day, they're almost all on the holy day representing resurrection, which you ought to get double points, and I haven't figured out how to do that yet. And then there's years for resurrection. We've talked about that, and you should get extra points for that. So I believe this is far and beyond the most important day in history so far. So it's before dawn. That's stated in John. It has to be before dawn, or the magic goes away, because it would no longer, if it were after dawn, it'd be on one dragon on the sacred round, but it wasn't. It's before dawn, and so it's on 13 temple, and that's very symbolic. He's getting his temple back of the body. So the point is, this is the day that's going to become Easter. It's called the waving of the sheaf of barley, or the waving of the omer. Of course, they did not know that was Easter. It was not designated by Moses as a holy day. Nobody's taking off work. It's a Sunday, which is not a holy day, until after this event. This event changes the world and the calendar, the holy days, and everything. So I list it as a holy day. But there was an interesting discrepancy between, and I'll be brief on this, between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The scripture says that the sheaf should be offered and waved on the Sabbath after Passover. On the day after the Sabbath after Passover. It's not the exact words. It's in Leviticus. I don't have the reference in my mind, but it could be interpreted two ways. The obvious way is what the Sadducees said. The offering should be held on the Sunday following Passover. See, they didn't have the word Sunday. They had to say day after Sabbath. We can just say it's the Sunday after Passover. That is correct. The Sadducees had it right. The Pharisees said, oh no, Passover was the holy day, so it's the day after Passover. So Passover is always 15 Nisan. The Pharisees always held this on 16 Nisan. At the time of the actual Easter, the day of the resurrection was both Sunday and 16 Nisan. And so they all did it at the same time. It didn't matter. But the Hebrew calendar today that Hebrews use follow the Pharisees, and so theirs is not correct. This was all. I had to figure all this out. Anyway, you can see this is a lot of work. The Hebrew calendar is off on this. Okay, the Sadducees had it right. Next, let's see, we've got a few more minutes. Next slide, 107. Okay, now remember we've talked about holy years. when I have all capital letters, it's a holy year. And since then, no, I don't. I put it in red sometimes when it's clear that it's a holy year. But anyway, oh yes, if I didn't say that, the major holy days are red, minor holy days are blue. Anyway, these are holy years are in all capital letters. Every Saturday year is holy. After 7 of them, the next year, Sunday, is the Jubilee year, which is even holier. The Jews have lost track of the Jubilee year. So we've talked about counting years by sevens before. 7 times 7 is 49. They just count 7 times 7 forever. So they don't count by 50s. They count by 49s. But the Sunday after the end of a 49-year Jubilee, the next year is called the Jubilee year. And it also is the first year of the next Jubilee cycle. Now, you can go from what Jeremiah, he implies, this is a technical thing, that the 9th year of Zedekiah was a Jubilee year. And that's important to know. Why? Because the Jews have lost track of when the Jubilee years. They don't know. Jonathan Cahn made an educated guess of a year for the Jubilee year, starting in the fall of 2015. That's not when it happened. The Jubilee was in the fall of 7 years earlier of 2008. 8 and 7 is 15. That sounds right. I remember it's just before Obama, who was elected the fall of 2008. In the Jubilee year, if you were righteous, it was a year of rejoicing and cheering. If you were unrighteous, it's a year of disaster. And it turns out that Jubilee is the year that begins the 49-year burning in 2008. So anyway, the point is Jeremiah is the key to understanding what Jubilee is, and most people haven't understood that. Let's do at least one more, 108, I mean. That was all to tell you we know when Jubilee is. Jesus is born in the most holy year, the Jubilee year. It's a year to proclaim liberty to the slaves and set all the captives free, to forgive debts. So when Jesus stood up, we're going to stop on this slide. When Jesus stood up in the synagogue in Luke 4, he says that the acceptable year of the Lord, the Messiah will declare the acceptable year of the Lord. Well, that to me is clearly referring to a Jubilee year. And I had to figure out if the year he said it was a Jubilee year, or the year of the resurrection would be a Jubilee year, or if the year of his birth was. And it turns out it was the year of his birth was the Jubilee year. And that he came, and that's what he's here for, to set the liberty slaves, set the captives free out of the spirit prison, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a good stopping place. We finished 108. And now we can open it. We have the 20 minutes left. And can open it to questions on whatever subject, discussion. I don't have any amazing story of this week of some great new discovery or anything like I did last 2 weeks. But first of all, I could go farther, but let's open it to questions. Okay, so I'm going to be clever and type on Mr. Chat. Okay, and I don't see any questions there. So just, Glenn, you take it and open it. However, you can turn on people's audio for questions.
Yeah, and I have one out of the chute, John, with the holy days and examples of, key figures acting on those dates. Does it appear that there is even an awareness of what's going on, or has it seemed like the angels or the Lord himself or the voice of the Spirit is the one that's keeping track of the calendars? How often is there any example in scriptures where someone, well, besides Christ, where someone actually knows that a holy day is coming up and that the expectation is that they're supposed to act on that day?
Good, great question. It's clear that most of the time, the people, especially with all of the calendars except the Hebrew, with all of the other calendars, nobody knows anything about them. The world still doesn't know about them, except the Indians know something about the sacred round. And some people tried to learn something about the Enoch, but nobody got it right, really. Nobody knows any of that, and things happen on those days. Let me comment on that first. Noah lets a bird out to see if the land is dry. He waits 7 days, lets out another one. The first one doesn't come back. It's a raven. So he lets out a dove because they were returning homing pigeons. And and it comes back 7 days later, comes back 7 days later, it brings a branch. Well, every one of those days is a decision day. They're a week apart in the summer. We didn't go through that with the Hebrew calendar, but those are the decision days. And Noah was making a decision. He was getting information about if the flood's over. And he made a decision. And after the bird doesn't come back, then he makes a decision, okay, they start opening the doors and come out and things. He didn't have a clue, I don't think, of what's going on there. There's no evidence that there's nothing about decision days back then. The book of Genesis is a revelation where the Lord is the one that put in all those strange little features. This is the day the rain started. This is the day that they saw the tops of the mountains. This is the day the boat landed. This is the day they got out. There's different things here. When a prophet's doing it, I believe the prophet can be inspired and he can feel like, hey, today feels like a good day to let a bird out and let's check on stuff. And they can feel when it's right to make an offering. They can be inspired, which means it's like an angel telling them. It's the Spirit telling them. But I've looked and studied this very question, and a lot of times there's nobody inspired around. Herod gives a decree to slaughter the infants. Is Herod being inspired? The wise men come and offer their gifts. It's on a holy day on several calendars. I don't know if they're inspired or not because they were good enough to read stars, but let's do King Herod the First, the Great. He's out slaughtering infants. This doesn't sound inspired, and yet it's right on the day, one dragon, when evil enters a child's life. It's on the day of mourning when Rachel's going to be weeping for her children. We're told over and over in the scriptures that God knows the end from the beginning, and he can just see it. All things are present before him. He knows when everything is going to happen. He knows what you're going to choose. He knows that Mary's going to say, okay, to the angel saying, you've been chosen to be the mother of God. So that's the part where they don't know. Other times they do know. There's a healing of Christ that he does at the Feast of Tabernacles, where the people are all gathered around the pool of Siloam to be healed because an angel comes and disturbs the water on that day. But the day is in the Feast of Tabernacles. They're not surprised that it's a holy day. John the Baptist is out baptizing on the Day of Atonement. Why? Is that lucky? No. That is the holiest day of the year. Everybody's off work, and everybody wants to hear a good, rousing repentance talk on the Day of Atonement, because that's what you're supposed to do. And if they believe they've already been repenting for 9 days, then they're ready to be baptized and make a covenant with God. That's a day on the calendar, no surprise. And that's why it was easy to figure out when Jesus was baptized. It's a day when they'd be expecting it. So the bottom line is, if they're holy days on the Hebrew calendar, and ones that they could sort of figure out, well, where they were sort of figure out, they were told to do certain ordinances on those days. Then, yeah, on those they cannot be surprised and they can just do it. But in any case, it always comes out right. And the Lord knows the end from the beginning. So that's my answer.
Okay, and Brady has a question for you in the chat too, John.
I see it there. Let me think if I fully answered that. On knowing ahead. Anyway, one thing that keeps me going in this is I'm amazed how it works out. I'll already find it's already holy on 10 days, and then I learned the 2 star calendars, and days I've already done and chosen, already proposed dates for events based on 8 or 10 other holy days. Now on the star calendar, it all comes out amazing on both calendars again. Anyway, it's just what keeps me going is I'm astounded at the Lord's clocks. Okay, next question. From Beatty, I noticed that on the Jubilee calendar and the uniform, you had an anchor date clear back about 4000 BC. And you mentioned something about first fruits. Why is that day picked? Here's a quote from the article. Since that time, the uniform Jubilee calendar has been discovered, which also has 364 days every year. The alignment chosen for it was also, this shows how the alignment was chosen. So before I finish reading, let me explain exactly what that means. Here's a calendar that has 364 days. That is always going to repeat. It's never going to have a leap day put in. Once you pick, I get to pick one day in history, or I get to discover whatever, choose somehow one day in history is chosen where you say, this day in history, I believe is going to hook up with this day on the calendar, because you cannot do it by seasons. It rotates through all the seasons, but you can only pick one date. If you pick that date judiciously, then 200 dates will all magically fall on holy days. And if you pick poorly, then it looks random. So now we're to this part of the question. The alignment chosen for it was also to align the same holy day, first fruits, with a uniform holy calendar. Okay, in other words, every once in a while, this floating uniform calendar will line up with a holy day on the regular calendar. That means that any event which falls on first fruits on one calendar would always occur on first fruits on the other. Oh, I don't say which calendar. This is ambiguous. And now, in retrospect, it now appears that the holy days appear to be in retrospect, it now appears that the holy days that appear to offer evidence favoring the aligning of the uniform calendar were really for the uniform. Okay, this is probably where I'm saying I made a mistake in my first guess, and I'm correcting it. Moreover, the importance of lining dates during the ministry was diminished in last month's article about the uniform. There it was seen that the alignments were on vital dates for the 7 chief angels in his lifetime. Okay, so this has been a work in progress from the start. And I cannot remember all the details off the top of my head, but when I do change something, I publish it like this. And so I think what I'm saying there, I'd have to go double check. But when it was first discovered, it looks like it should have lined up one way. And let's not try to solve it now, Glenn, but that's okay. You can look at what you want. But and then later I changed the uniform one to be different. So I hope that answers the question. And I try to tell people when I do that. Go ahead.
I verbalize it. Sometimes you seem to kind of back into it. Like you find the one day that you think would best match how that calendar would fit. And then all the other alignments kind of fall into place, right? So on your last slide, we just talked about how Jesus was born in that Jubilee year, right? Like, I guess I'm really asking, did you kind of back into it and find, oh, this Jubilee year looks like good. Let's just back into that. And then it just happened to align in that first fruit date. Or if you found that date clear back in 4000 BC and aligned it to Enoch, and it just so happened to align, when Jesus was born.
Somewhere I will say exactly how I did it, but as I recall, and I'd go more carefully on what I said, I've never changed this, as I'm almost positive. As I recall, the way the Jubilee, the real, not the uniform, that was separate. That has to be done. That's a separate question. But the way the real Jubilee was discovered was the way I just said in the slide, that Jeremiah talks about redeeming the land, and that's what you do in a Jubilee year. And I took that scripture as the basis, and when I did that, Christ turns out to be born in the Jubilee year, and everything lined up. But that one was actually taken from history. Now, I think this question you're asking in the quote is the uniform Jubilee calendar. Now, that's something nobody knows about. There's no way to do it except the way I did it. And I believe that one, I don't remember right now how that one was done. I do say it in the articles. And that little quote there isn't enough for me it doesn't.
Just a quick thing. Do you have an article on the Uniform Jubilee? I really only heard you talk about it in this article on the Enoch calendar. It doesn't seem like it has its own announcement or article.
Yeah, I may not have a whole article. It's often in a paragraph somewhere where I say, oh, by the way, there's another one. But I will say, I'll try to say what the correlation is, that I lined it up so that this stuff falls on that. And then I'll try to explain why I chose that one year. Yeah, but that's all that you need. Once you have that one year, all the other years fall into place. Oh, and another thing on the years, on the regular Jubilee, it's aligned to the seasons. So you have these leap weeks put in to keep aligned to the seasons. But on the years, there's never any leap anything. Both Jubilee calendars always have 364 years in a great Jubilee year, or rather a Jubilee great year. So on both of those calendars, you only have to find what one date is, and you got them all. And Jeremiah tells us the date for the one calendar, and I picked a date somehow for the other one. And it's got so many dates that line up with it now. It's written in stone. Okay, we got 5 more minutes. Let's see. I got another question here from Gary. When did you discover the decision days? Could there be such similar patterns for future dates? You're going to have, I'll let you get, I'll do the first question first, and you might have to use words and get a microphone to tell me the second one, because I don't know what you mean by similar. Well, I'll try to answer it, then you get on and tell me if I did or not. What did I use to discover the decision days? I believe the first real clue was, in fact, I was shown something, and there were two witnesses. Oh, well, first of all, they're on the Hebrew calendar. You read a book on the Hebrew calendar, and they call it the days of fasting. They don't know their decision days, but they have they have the 3 weeks on the Hebrew calendar. They have a summer fast on the 9th of Tammuz. Well, there's the fast of Tammuz is on 17 Tammuz. And then they have 3 weeks where they do something for each week. They don't have holy days. And then,
sorry, a recognized pattern then.
Yeah, it's a recognized pattern. And then on the 9th of Ab is also a fast day. And what I did by figuring things out was to realize that each of those weeks were a decision day, which they don't say that. They just call it a 3-week fast in the summer. And that the last day is not a decision day. The last day is when the result of your decisions on the first days happen. The way that was discovered was two simultaneous things, and I didn't figure this out. This was shown to me somehow. I was asking the question about the curious, weird dates in the flood of why do they tell you when I've said this before in this lecture. Why do they tell you when the mountains appeared? Why do they tell you when he's letting these birds out? I mean, down to the day. Until this time in the flood, there's not a day mentioned except the big long days of creation or something, but it says how many years somebody lived when they had their son. But now he's telling you how many days till the land dried, how many days till everything. And I was just shown that it was all symbolic of the first birth of the earth. The flood is the rebirth of the earth, or the baptism of the earth. And those days are telling you when things happened in the Garden of Eden. So when I came to the bird days, the raven day is different. That's when Satan's released. That's when Satan first enters the Garden of Eden. And then the 3 decision days, I saw that those corresponded to Eve. That's on the first day, Satan tempts her with the fruit, the forbidden fruit. That's 17th of Tammuz. The 24th of Tammuz is when she offers it to Adam. And the day when the dove brings the branch of the olive tree back to Adam, that dove is Eve bringing. Oh, that is the. I don't want to mix them up. I might not have them exactly straight, but the third time the dove comes back is the fall of. I think it's the third time when he lets the dove go and it doesn't come back. The second time. Well, just remember what the bird does. First time the bird comes back, I think, with nothing. The second time is when it comes back with the bird, the olive branch in its mouth, and that's when she brings him the fruit. And then a week later is the fall when he takes the fruit, and that's when the bird flies away and never comes back. And that's like kicked out of the Garden of Eden.
Can the result happen years after a decision day?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's not just 7 days after, it's years after. And so what happens is the temple burnings, both the first and the second temple burnings, happen. It's really 10 Ab, but it's corresponding to 9 Ab. The temple burnings are the result of the bad decisions. Anyway, the way I figured out the decisions are everywhere is everything fell on this. When Joshua was saying, choose ye this day whom you will serve. When Elijah is saying the same idea of choose between Baal and what God, those are all on decision days, and it just piles up. when Martin Harris, when Joseph Smith is deciding whether to give Martin the place, it's a decision day.
Oh, wow. Forgot about that one.
And the bad result is, this is on my tutorial right now, is why it's in my mind. The day of when they're told that this is gone and you really messed up, that was the result on the day of the result of your decision day. So it's just all through history. Okay, we are now, past time. As for similar patterns for future dates, yeah, if you know anybody trying to get future dates, I mean, this kind of stuff, it's used all through history, but I don't do the future. I've spent full time on the past, and it's pretty tough.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like messing with the future. The couple of times I've tried to, I had some ideas on the future. I didn't publish them, and I was so glad I didn't, because all of them were wrong. So don't try to.
Well, you've made the statement. You can't discern the future from the patterns of the past. I mean, well, you just can't predict it.
There's so many options. Those 10 holy days, if I try to do it for the future, I'm not going to know the details of the event of which 10 to choose. There's every year there's a couple of days that are holy on 10 different days. The holiest day of the year. You've done this, Gary. It's, there's just several. Yeah. That's not that rare.
True.
The trick is to have those dates meaningful. Jesus is transfigured on the day of light and baptized on the day of water. But maybe it wouldn't have been that way. See, the Lord can vary all of that up. And I'm not, I've never been commissioned to do future. I'm commissioned to figure out how these calendars work and to share that as a witness after the fulfilling of prophecy that God knew it ahead, which is what Denver has taught, that prophets, it's all about, to have a witness afterwards.
Yeah, I guess the genesis of my question was when you had mentioned that Sunday wasn't a holy day before the resurrection. Wasn't recognized. Well, the waving of the sheaves. But I wonder if there could be some future events that would have a similar day.
There was one future that was future not very long ago. And I think this is another question. I'm going to, last question, and I'll get this done in 2 minutes, so I'm only 5 minutes over. But it's a really good thought. So I had to be, so after Moses, the Jews go along and they add all these holy days. The Maccabees rededicate the temple in 160 something BC and have a miracle happen of the oil lasted for 8 days. Okay. Now they celebrate that. That's wonderful. Well, is that a real holy day or not? Is that just something they added or they inspired? What's going on? And they did this a bunch of times. The answer is all of them are real holy days. Reuben is born on the Feast of Rededication, and Noah dies on that day. And these have been holy days all along, but nobody knew it. The one that's really cool for us is there's 4 kinds of days of atonement. The first big one is what Moses was told. The 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement, 10th of Tishri. Then along comes Nebuchadnezzar, and the Lord says, write this down in your book. He says it to Ezekiel and Jeremiah. He said, this day, all that happened was it said Nebuchadnezzar set his face against Israel. Suddenly that's a holy day. It's called the Winter Fast Day, the 10th of the 10th month. Well, the 10th of the first month is the day you choose the lamb for the sacrifice. There's one missing out of a set of 4. You got 1, 7, and 10. What about the 10th day of the 4th month? It's been absolutely nothing all through history until the execution and sacrifice of Joseph Smith. He dies on the 10th day of the 4th month. And he is the other sacrificial lamb. Christ is the first sacrificial lamb. Joseph Smith is the second one. And he is doing an atonement for his people. He came back to be sacrificed when they accused him of being Well, you don't need, you should look up the history, but that was an atonement. Denver's talked about this, I think. That's
Yeah.
never been a holy day before. But guess what? What was the day that 7 days earlier before the 17th of Tammuz that Satan got into the garden? It was the 10th day of the 4th month. So Joseph was killed on the same day that Lucifer enters the garden. And it's the same day that the raven was let go before the 3 dove days. So Joseph Smith dies on what I call Raven Day. And guess what? There's a constellation in the sky called the Raven. And Joseph Smith died on Raven Day of the constellations.
Wow.
So, yeah. So there's a holy day that was not known before his death. And if nobody knows it till now, unless they read my paper on his death. Okay, I'm sorry to be so much over. It's all Gary's fault.
Yes, it is.
He asks such good questions that I can't say no. I see it's a problem. Okay, I'll let everybody go. Happy New Year, and thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks all. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.